I'm Michael Tomor, the director of the Tampa Museum of Art, and I was at Penn State for many years, having arrived in 1980 to start my bachelor's degree, and graduated in 1983, and then returned in 1986 to take on my master's and then my doctorate in 1990. And then I graduated in 1993 with my doctorate. You know, having been involved in museums now professionally and full-time for almost 22 years, I can say that the role of a museum in a community has changed dramatically, and its function in any community, large or small, is to provide educational opportunities outside of the traditional classroom experience. And museums have taken on such a critical role now as education in the primary and secondary schools has shifted dramatically. Really focusing on testing and really focusing the attention of students to build maybe the greater economy for the future, especially here in the United States. And along the way, a lot of the humanities and arts have been pushed out of the normal curriculum. So museums have served as an incubator for developing new ideas that directly link, I think, people to their community, but also to history and culture, and even to that extent, science and art, in a way that couldn't be achieved and is not being achieved in primary and secondary school. So our role is really to help people understand who they are in the greater context. So in the art museum world, we primarily focus on developing an environment to preserve culture for future generations and for current generations. That's our primary role, and in an art museum, it's to preserve those artifacts and the artworks so that others will have an opportunity to kind of contemplate what had happened before them and what's happening now in the role of the artist and in the role that creativity plays in our lives. But in order to accomplish that task, we need to provide programs that are user-friendly to a community that is often not predisposed to art at all. So we have to integrate ways that are comfortable in people's lives. And I think the most common way that we can do that, and have done that for years, is offer food and wine at receptions to get them in. But I think that it goes further than that. It's taking things that are comfortable and familiar to people and bringing that to our world, the museum world. And that can be complicated, but could also be really exciting. So for those people, for example, that are primarily interested in studio art, we offer studio art programs. This is a normal function of a museum. For those people who want to learn in a lecture-type program setting or through a tour, we offer docent-guided tours, or we offer specialists in the field to come and speak to community groups and what I would call maybe more of a little bit of an art history format with a lecturer, and then you're the part of the audience. As communities are diversifying and people are becoming less comfortable with that type of learning experience, we're offering ways to talk about art and look at art through different pedagogy. So instead of kind of the traditional talking head art history program where you listen and learn, now we're asking the audience to tell us what they're seeing. How are they interpreting it? What's comfortable for them? And I think that that's really informing us as art professionals on ways in which human beings really discern information. And so we go back to that very fundamental point at a very young age where we learn how to speak and read and write through object identification. And that type of object identification builds visual vocabulary. And we want to know, what are you seeing now? What's the vocabulary you're pulling from those very early years of object identification? And how are you interpreting it so we can better fulfill an experience for you? So visual thinking strategies is a new pedagogy that we're all incorporating into learning experiences at the Art Museum, where we ask really primarily three very simple questions. What's happening here? What makes you say that? What are you seeing that makes you say that? And what else can you find? And there's no answer. It's not, no, you're seeing it wrong, or this is not what the artist's intention was, because, fundamentally it doesn't matter. In that type of discussion, fundamentally, we are trying to understand how people are looking at things now in a very different way. So take that into consideration when art is no longer in the schools, in primary and secondary school. And so that furthering of information in art, really, it fundamentally stops second or third grade. So we're working with adult populations now whose visual vocabulary is really almost like a child's. And we are trying to bring them to an adult level of thinking in a way that's meaningful to them without scaring them off or making them feel intimidated. So our role really is, I think, very significant. It's just a matter of getting them in the doors, because museums aren't really a part of people's lives as much as they used to be. We're trained, primarily to be art historians, to give information back in the way that we learned it. So we sat in our classroom experience and listened to our professors lecture, and they shared different ways to do methodology and research, and how to pull a work apart and put it back together so that it is like reading a book. With individual vocabulary words leading to paragraphs and full narratives. And then somewhere along the line for me, I realized that it was so much more than that. And it was really more of a reflection of not just the artist who created it, but the artist's reflection of the culture that surrounded him or her. And so you could tell stories that were really lengthy, that went way beyond maybe what the artist even knew, or what their intention was to deliver in their image. And that happened for me when I started my doctoral program here at Penn State and started working with Jean Porter. At that point, she was a Southern Baroque specialist, and I guess even though she's retired, still is considered to be. And the Counter-Reformation really stimulated me to understand about change in human nature and the way that people really inform change from their reactions and counter-reactions to policies and procedures of the state and of the faith, whatever that might be. And so that humanity, that integration of humanity into kind of the dry pulling apart of images started to shift for me. And it became much more of a human experience, and it translated really well to the museum environment. As a master's student, I worked at the Palmer Museum of Art in almost every division, from press and marketing to education, and then curatorial, and it was great to work with people in understanding how images can really tell 1,000 stories, and working with real art rather than what we used to call art in the dark, where you just watch on slide format. And so that experience here, not just in art history, but also the work at the museum, it really completely informed my degree, my profession. And I think to that end, I probably would not have gone into museum work had that not happened here. I probably would have ended up being a professor of art history, which is fine. It's just, it's one facet of what I do now, and maybe to that degree a smaller facet now. No. Well, as an undergraduate here, I took an art history general survey class. It was my last semester. No, it wasn't my last semester. I took my general survey class maybe in my junior year. I think you had to do your basic degree requirements, and then you could really get into art histories. And so in my junior year, I took this art history class, and it was an honors art history class. Not that that was something I fit well into, but it was being taught by Tony Cutler. And the class was the first. It was only we were tested on the artwork in Jansen's History of Art, the Bible of art history back then. And the class was a midterm and a final. The midterm was you had to know every single image and every piece of information associated with that image through half the book. And then the other half of the book was the final. And his delivery of information and how he presented was so stimulating to me. I never forgot that. He became really someone who I wanted to be, and how he communicated information. And when I left with my bachelor's, and I moved away and tried to figure out what I was going to do with my life with a degree in art history, it resonated. And I decided I would go back and study early Christian Byzantine art. And when that happened for me, I was going to go to Johns Hopkins, and I called Tony and asked him, if he would write me a letter. And he said, listen, if you are going to go into Byzantine and early Christian, why don't you just come back and work with me? So I did. And the other people that entered into my life under that experience were really important people in my life. Elizabeth Smith, professor of medieval art, and Elizabeth Walters, antiquities. They were all part of my interest in developing, greater thinking in that time period. And so I look at that time very fondly, and then realized that I couldn't get a job as easily if I stayed in Byzantine, and that I was going to have to move away from that discipline for a variety of reasons. And that's when I decided to start working with Jean Porter. And with Jean came George Monner, a specialist in Manet, late 19th century French. And I also knew that I was going to have to become fluent in 20th century American, because that's where the jobs were. And I think primarily they still are, maybe even more cutting edge now, postmodernism. And so Craig Zabel became a very important part of my world. So those 6 professors I could look back onto and say they shaped who I am today when it came to knowledge about art. How we determine success is for ourselves is different than how other people would see that. So I would say that for me, as an art historian, really learning about art education in the public realm, not in the academic realm, I feel like I really learned a lot and achieved a lot by understanding the role that an art museum can play in the lives of their community, but also primarily in the lives of children. And so I'm very proud that we were able to initiate some programs at the Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art in southwestern Pennsylvania for children, not only developing a full-blown annual exhibition program of the children's art so that they could see themselves in a professional setting at a very young age, as well as their parents seeing them and their teachers seeing creativity being hung on the walls of a museum from a child. But also figuring out a way to reach those school districts that were so isolated and so poor that there would be no art if we didn't bring it to them. So at the Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art, I was able to expand an artist in residency program that went beyond the visual arts into the performing arts and the literary arts, and bring that program into the school districts in a way that it had not been done before in southwestern Pennsylvania. So we tripled the number of residency days at Southern Alleghenies Museum of Art from about 250 to 750 days a year, where artists were in 56 different school districts. And these are 5 and 10-day residencies where these artists, some professional teaching artists, many students, were out in the schools teaching directly with the kids. And that type of program then was expanded to the healthcare industry for adults that were really suffering from challenges associated with sleep disorders and anxiety and stress. It's the same sort of program, but now it was for adults. And we just but incorporated the residency program for adult populations that were trying to get through complicated matters in their life. So that program turned into a sub-program called Arts for Healing. And we primarily partnered with Conemaugh Medical Center in Johnstown and the Home Nursing Agency in Altoona to bring resident artists into clinics and to homes of people who were suffering from late life health disorders, primarily post-polio syndrome and stroke victims, but also those people who were in need of assisted care living in homes. All that brought together was recognized by the federal government in a grant, in an award from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, honoring our museum as one of the premier art museums providing art education in the community. That was very special. It was a White House ceremony. Laura Bush presented the award to us, and it made me feel like we really accomplished a lot. So I'm very proud of that kind of moment in time. Yeah. And then to further that, at the El Paso Museum of Art, we started a program specifically called Impressions for those people who were suffering from dementia, primarily Alzheimer's disease, and those who were getting through trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, and developed some really good fundamental relationships with the Alzheimer's Association and Fort Bliss Army Base. And then I just developed that program now that I'm the director at the Tampa Museum of Art, called Connections, and we've expanded that program to people who are suffering from depression. So I'm really proud that we have figured out a way to bring art to community members that are isolated, less advantaged or disadvantaged through health problems. I'm really proud of that. Yeah. Yeah, and I do a lot of career counseling still as the director of an art museum, but I did when I was on the College of Arts and Architecture Alumni Board. I really like that. I didn't get any advice as an undergraduate, and that's not a criticism about the professors. It's just it wasn't their job, and there wasn't like what sometimes you have in high school with counselors to help you along. You just figure you're going to teach. But what I would say to art history majors here at Penn State is don't underestimate what you've learned and how that can be applied to your life in many ways. There is nothing, in my opinion, more noble than art and the creative experience. And they need to understand that, and the community needs to understand that, because it's what separates us from every other being on earth, is this notion that we can see reality, digest that information, and then reinterpret it in a way that is unique and exciting to that person, and still have that connect with someone else and have that be universal. So to not see art as just simply an object, but that it is truly a reflection of so many things that make us human, and to look beyond the surface of the work of art, whether it's sculpture or painting or a piece of architecture. I think probably the thing that surprised me the most didn't happen while I was here. It happened in retrospect. Looking back at my time here, I really, you're like on a treadmill when you're a student, or I was, because I was a full-time student and I worked 30 hours a week at the museum, and I bartended, 30 hours a week, and just trying to make ends meet, and then later taught undergraduate art history as a doctoral student. Those things just, that's fundamentally what you do. But in looking back at that time, I think that when I see how much I did and was able to accomplish here, and with a lot of assistance, that didn't happen by myself. This university really helped me get through all of that, because I put myself through school, is how I persevered through that at all. It really sets you up for being a high achiever in the real world. It doesn't set you up for failure. It gives you the tools that you need to be able to take a project and stick with it for 3 years in the midst of so much chaos and distraction. It allows you to communicate with people from all walks of life that maybe come from different cultures and speak different languages and have different interpretations, and you don't know that that's happening while it's happening, but you're running into that all the time. And so when I think about maybe my success in being able to communicate with the public now, I think about how that certainly happened here, and maybe in a much more self-contained and maybe in a safer environment than it is really in the real world. So it allowed me a comfort level to transfer all that information as I left the university system. That was probably my biggest surprise, is that actually happened while I was here. And it wouldn't have had I not gone through that experience.